This is an introduction to the poem 2:30 by Fanthorpe, and in putting together this this introduction, I'm indebted to material I found online by Mr. Elkin Jones from a different school. All the speaking you're going to hear is my thoughts. Some of the content of the PowerPoint slides are taken directly from his presentation, which is in the public domain on Google, and I hope this is not a problem for anybody. Still, on with the introduction. First thing I want everybody to be utterly aware of is that Fanthorpe, this poet, is a woman, Ursula Ascham Fanthorpe, and she died actually in 2009, so comparatively recently, having had a long career, including holding posts such as the Professor of Poetry at Oxford. Much of her poetry has explored the possibilities of more than a single voice within a poem, and this poem is no exception. And we will have to play around, and you will certainly have to play around with voice as you study the poem. Because this is an introduction, I don't intend to spend too long trying to differentiate between the voices. I think that's something that you need to work out for yourselves, and also in class. So, without further ado, I'll pause now and give you a chance to get hold of your anthologies and read the poem for yourselves. I'll then go through the poem, stanza by stanza, and just point out a few key ideas. Each slide that is coming has a little group of bullet points on, and these either will be addressed by me in this talk, or they will give you material for yourselves to consider when you're working on your own. So, I'll pause now, you do the same, and read the poem. The poem opens with the establishment, if you like, of the point of the poem, the idea of time. This idea that once upon a school time that opens the poem, hinting not only at time as a definite focus of the poem, this idea of a school time, an unusual phrase, relating obviously to childhood, but also with a line starting once upon a, this sense that the poet is introducing here almost a fairy tale or something of that nature, certainly something that we haven't seen very often in the poems we're looking at in this anthology, a real sense of creating a sense of almost fantasy, as though we're looking back deep into the childhood of the speaker. So once upon a school time, he did something very wrong. Now, who is the he, we wonder? This, I think, is really important. We notice the capitalisation. We might expect a capitalisation for the start of a line anyway, but it's continued in something very wrong. And surely this is the voice of the miscreant, the voice of the child, thinking back and imagining himself. He did something very wrong. Can't remember what it was. Neither, incidentally, can the schoolteacher, the she in the poem, and I suggest that it might be her voice that we hear in the parenthesis. It could be either of them, but I'd like you to think about who it is that we hear in that parenthesis before the poem moves into the second stanza, where she is brought centre stage, and she said he'd done, and again the repetition, something very wrong. And we can see the technique being used by Fanthorpe of capitalisation for key ideas or events. In this case, in the child's world, there's no understanding of what the issue is, but in the next, it's actually used here for time towards the end of the next stanza, because again, time as a concept is so vital to all of us, to our lives, that it takes on this level of importance. Notice here as well within this chapter a couple of fun things relating to voice. First of all, the fact that she is described as being cross, and yet the boy is too worried about being wicked. And we wonder who's speaking. It's almost as though, as a child, the boy is thinking that the teacher is cross, but as an adult, he recognises that it was wickedness that he was scared of. and didn't want to remind her about. There really does seem to be here shifts in time within the poem itself. Moves on. And the boy begins to explain. He knew a lot of time, it says. He knew, and then we have, for the first time, the enjambment, which is going to run regularly throughout this poem. From this point, we see quite a lot of enjambment. The lines flow, even with the comma at the end, the lines flow into each other. The idea being, even with the comma at the end of the stanza here, that the line will flow into the stanza that follows. Notice also the way the language works now. Getting up time, time you were off time, time to go home time, TV time. This real sense that the child's world is a world of key events, not a world divided into 24 hours and minutes and seconds and controlling us to that degree, but just these rather vague concepts that get together to create the times that the boy understands. This is definitely his world. Now, we were talking earlier about enjambment, and sure enough, the enjambment has brought the idea all the way down to this line here, time for my kiss time, that was grand time. And this links together the stanzas, almost in the same way that the day is linked, not by the definition, if you like, of minutes, perhaps here represented by the stanza breaks within the poem, but actually just by the fact that things happen when it is time for them to happen. This is a child, it is not an adult. As we read on, this becomes even clearer in the stanza that follows. The boy now, we're told, he knows the clock face, it says, the little eyes and the two long legs for walking, as if somehow the clock face is a face, a real face on the wall, nothing to tell the time, but just a friendly, cheerful thing on the wall. But perhaps here is the first indication of an adult speaking for a while. Instead of understanding the voice, if you like, of this face, it's actually the tics that can't be understood, and so we're told that he couldn't click its language, and it's the first metaphor of this kind, which you might say is absolutely poetic language that we've seen in the poem. It's no longer a conversation, perhaps, and much more of a poem. Because of this, we're told, so he waited, because he didn't understand, beyond once upon a, out of reach of all the time force, and he knew he had escaped forever, and again we're going to see some more of my favourite enjambment in a minute. If we follow the red line through into the next stanza, he's escaped forever into what? Into the smell of old chrysanthemums, into. And this now, of course, is a different world. This is not anymore the child's world, but surely is much more the adult's world. This is a world of senses. He has the smell of old chrysanthemums on her desk. An interesting idea here. The teacher may be more forgetful than we're aware. Not only has she forgotten the boy, but she's obviously forgotten her old flowers as well. Notice again Fanthorpe's capitalisation. There's this strange oxymoron of the silent noise his hangnail made. He's concentrating on small elements of his finger, of his body here. And he escapes, we're told, into the air outside the window, into ever. And it's almost as though being kept in isolation in this way has allowed the boy to enter the world of total fantasy, of escapism. He can't physically leave the room, but he can go through the window. And at this point, everything is changed once again, because his fantasy is broken. And then, my goodness, she said, scuttling in, look at these wonderful verbs, I forgot all about you. Run along or you'll be late. We're being told here what was said. There's a speed about it. The verbs hurry. The sentences are short. Urgency is used. And the boy becomes once again simply a figure within the life of the school. He becomes a figure that can be slotted back into school time, as if somehow he can just become part of a puzzle. He got home in time for tea time, next time, no time for that now time. And again, the times, the enjambment is beginning to continue again as the day merges into all the things that the boy loves. And this time, we hear the boy's ideas, maybe the boy trying to explain what has happened, being pushed away. There's too much urgency in the adult world for the boy's life to be given any real due time. No time for that time, he's told. And at the end of the poem, he never forgot. Well, I'm sure he never forgot, and one of the reasons that we are sure he never forgot, of course, is that he is probably telling us all about this now. And the idea is that he's able to escape, says, into the clockless land of ever. And this is really important, because this idea that there might be a land that is clockless is, of course, a land that is free from the constant regulation of time. Time hides tickless, it says, waiting to be born. And that idea is one that I want you to really think about, because that's an idea with your teachers that you're going to have to engage in, this idea of a silent, tickless time, waiting. There's always something new, something is going to happen around the corner, and we have to be able to play with that idea, both as adults and as... Now, this is only an introduction. It is meant to give you something to go on when you're thinking about this poem. All the poems need to be linked, and you're going to need to think about which other poems in the anthology have childhood experience as a theme. You also want to think about the way the poems are written, and maybe look again at which other poems have this range of voices, this sense of a shift of perspective between child and adult, possibly even between child, adult and a second adult, that we see in this poem. You might find a poem like Hide and Seek interesting in this regard. I hope this has been useful and not too long, and the idea is that you use this to get yourselves ready for the lessons on this poem. Thanks for listening.